Welcome back. We just got the latest snapshot of the U.S. economy, and the picture rattled markets. The data showed slower economic growth and stubborn inflation. Now, history says voters make up their minds about the economy by the end of June. That's just 2 months away. Plus, President Biden is fighting some nostalgia vibes in the electorate about the economy. What about it? Okay, so here's what the numbers said. You're going to know these, and then we're going to make them make sense to you. What you would like to see would be the number for GDP, the green arrow going up more. You'd like to see the number on the right side of your screen for inflation going down. That's what you'd like to see. But that's not what the president got. And it's not to say that 1.6 is a recession or that we're about to tip into recession. But what you'd like to see coming out of economic contraction would be 3%, would be very good, or even 2.5 would have been fine. 1.6 is anemic. And the harder number for Biden is inflation, because that hits his voters hard. Who are the first people to feel inflation? Working class voters, right? Blue collar voters, lower middle class voters, they get hit hard first. Who are the last people to stop feeling inflation? Same voters, because they have less cushion in their budgets. So how do people feel about it? Well, you're not going to be surprised to see that in these New York Times, Siena College polls, that most people think the economy stinks. And only 21% say that it's excellent or good. That's not helpful if you're Joe Biden, because you end up with this. You end up with 34% approval on the economy with 63% disapproval. Womp womp. But it's even harder when you do this, which is Donald Trump. Now, this is really fascinating about this, the way that the Times asked this question. They said, what do you think about how the economy was under Trump? They didn't say, how do you think he'd do in the future? How did he do as president? 64% approve. Now, that's not what polls about Trump said in the last year of his presidency, but people are forgetting about the pandemic, and they're associating the pandemic and the cratering of the economy with Joe Biden. They're associating Trump and the 3-4% GDP growth rate that Trump was experiencing in the opening years of his presidency. Okay, Tia.
I also think, to the point you were just making about the different ways Trump and Biden are perceived, there's always kind of like, the more a president is removed from office, yes, the more they benefit from our selective memory of how things were, both the good and the bad. But I also think, especially when you talk to younger voters, voters who are more lower income, they credit Trump with the stimulus checks. Yep. Now, all of us here at this panel knows Trump didn't do it all by himself, and we also know that Democrats under Biden wanted to do more stimulus. They wanted to keep the earned income tax credit going for low-income parents. Republicans blocked it. But again, I think the limited understanding of how government works and the fact that Trump put his name on the letter that accompanied those early stimulus checks, he gets a lot of benefit for the things that happened during the pandemic to help lessen the blow.
You can't beat the vibes, right, Daniela? Like, when people, if Americans associate Trump with economic growth, they're not. That's cast in stone now, right?
Yeah. Well, another thing is Trump's in court. He's not talking about this. The last time he went, his remarks kind of resonated with voters. Was he was calling what happened in Charlottesville a peanut event compared to the. Let's talk about that. I mean, like, this is what he should be talking about, because it would work for him ahead of November. But really what's happening is, and we're seeing Biden trying to push that message of like, this what happened under Trump. We are the ones that passed all this legislation to help to boost the economy. Inflation is still bad, but it's getting better. That's what we're hearing from Biden. We're not hearing that from Trump. And so that's kind of the two situations that are taking place right now ahead of the election.
Cusack, you and I are old enough to remember George Herbert Walker Bush, the OG,
yes,
the OGB. And in 1992, he lost re-election because people thought the economy was bad. But by the time Election Day rolled around, the economy was in recovery. Yep. And when Bill Clinton and James Carville were talking about it's the economy, stupid, the economy was actually growing. But voters had already made up their minds in the summer and said the economy is bad. They blame Bush for it. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.